You didn't click this by chance. Not this title, not this timing, not this exact convergence of curiosity, restlessness, and quiet hope moving through you right now. There are moments when the universe stops whispering and starts arranging. This is one of them. Because if you're seeing this, something subtle but irreversible has already happened in your financial field. Not in your bank account, not on paper, but deeper than numbers, deeper than strategy. At the level where realities are selected before they ever appear. Pause for a moment. Feel the stillness beneath the noise of your thoughts. That sensation you can't quite name. The sense that something is shifting, even if nothing looks different yet. That's not imagination. That's recognition. You were taught to believe that money moves slowly, that wealth is built brick by brick through years of sacrifice, stress, and deferred joy. You were taught that financial change requires visible struggle, linear effort, and constant vigilance. And for a long time, you lived inside that agreement. You played by those rules. You internalized that story. But stories have lifespans, and yours is expiring. What most people never realize is that financial reality is not a fixed landscape you travel through. It's a responsive field that reorganizes itself around identity, around expectation, around the quality of awareness you bring to it. This is why two people can work equally hard and experience radically different outcomes. This is why logic alone has never been enough to explain prosperity, and this is why lately something inside you has felt off. As if the old explanations no longer fit, as if the effort you once relied on stopped producing the results it promised. That feeling isn't failure, it's disengagement from an outdated timeline. There is a moment, rare, quiet, and easily missed, when the observer begins to wake up. When you stop seeing yourself as someone inside a financial system and start sensing that the system itself responds to you. Not emotionally, not metaphorically, structurally. Quantum physics didn't invent this truth. It only gave it language. At the subatomic level, particles don't exist as solid things until they are observed. Until then, they exist as probability, as potential, as multiple outcomes occupying the same space at once. Reality doesn't solidify first and get noticed later. Observation is the act that selects what becomes real. Now, bring that understanding inward. Your financial life has never been a single path. It has always been a spectrum of probabilities. A field of simultaneous outcomes waiting for coherence. Waiting for an observer who knows how to look. Most people observe from fear, from memory, from inherited limitation. They look at money through the lens of past disappointment, cultural conditioning, and silent agreements made long before they had a choice. And so the field responds faithfully, collapsing probability into experiences that match those expectations. But you're no longer observing from there. Something shifted. Maybe gradually, maybe all at once. Maybe you can't pinpoint the moment, only the aftertaste it left behind. A strange calm, a quiet certainty, a loosening of desperation, a sense that forcing no longer works, and somehow that feels right. This is the first sign of a quantum financial shift. The nervous system stops bracing. When the body no longer reacts to money with chronic tension, the field begins to reorganize. Not dramatically at first, subtly, almost politely, through symbols, through synchronicities, through repetition that feels intentional rather than random. You start noticing numbers, not because they're magic, but because your attention has become more coherent. You overhear conversations about opportunities that seem oddly relevant. You stumble across information that answers questions you didn't consciously ask. You feel drawn to ideas that once felt unrealistic but now feel inevitable. This isn't motivation, it's alignment. And alignment doesn't shout, it resonates. Ancient traditions understood this long before modern science caught up. They taught that wealth flows toward clarity, not effort. Toward inner order, not outer struggle. Toward those who can hold abundance in their nervous system without collapsing into guilt, fear, or self-sabotage. Because money doesn't test your morality, it tests your capacity to receive without defense, to hold without gripping, to circulate without fear of loss. This is why wanting money has never been enough. Wanting comes from absence. And absence is a signal the field responds to with more absence. What changes reality is embodiment, the internal state that says, without words, this belongs here. And lately, whether you've admitted it or not, that state has been forming inside you. You may still have doubts. That's normal. Doubt doesn't block quantum shifts. Identity rigidity does. And your identity is softening, becoming more fluid, less defined by struggle narratives and survival strategies. You're beginning to sense that your value was never tied to effort alone, that your gifts are not accidents, that the ideas that come to you are not random firings of neurons, but signals moving through a receptive system. Neuroscience would call this increased coherence between brain regions. Mystics would call it alignment with source. Quantum theorists would call it phase lock-in with a higher order pattern. Different languages, same phenomenon. And here's the part most people never hear. Once a financial field shifts at the quantum level, it cannot be undone. It can be delayed by old habits, distorted by fear, slowed by disbelief. But the probability distribution has already changed. The dice are no longer weighted the same way. This is why certain paths now feel heavy, even if they once felt safe. Why some ambitions quietly dissolve while new ones emerge without force. Why you may feel less interested in chasing and more interested in positioning internally. You're no longer asking, how do I get money? You're beginning to ask, who do I need to be coherent with what's already moving toward me? That question alone signals a different timeline. Stillness becomes important now, not passivity, precision. The kind that comes from listening rather than pushing, from allowing the next step to reveal itself instead of demanding certainty in advance. This is the paradox of quantum prosperity. The less you grasp, the more clearly the path organizes itself. Because grasping collapses possibility too early. Allowing lets the optimal outcome emerge. You don't need to convince yourself of this. You don't need affirmations or forced belief. The field doesn't respond to words. It responds to state. And your state is changing. You're beginning to trust without evidence, to feel supported without guarantees, to sense movement without visible proof. That's not delusion. That's how every major shift begins, before the world catches up. So if you're here, listening, and something inside you feels both calm and alert, understand this. You're not waiting for money to change. Money is waiting for coherence. And coherence is forming now. This is not the reward at the end of effort. This is the reorganization before manifestation. Stay here. Stay present. Let the old story dissolve without argument. Because in the quantum field, the decision has already been made. Before anything visible changes, perception does. That's the part no one warns you about. Because once your financial field shifts, the world doesn't immediately hand you proof in numbers. It hands you patterns. And if you're not trained to see them, you'll dismiss the very evidence that confirms what's happening. But you've already begun noticing. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly, repeatedly. Moments that feel too precise to be random. You hear the same idea from 3 unrelated sources in the same week. Someone mentions your ability in a way that lands differently than before. An opportunity brushes past your awareness, not fully formed, but undeniably present. You feel a strange neutrality toward money problems that once triggered anxiety. This is not optimism. It's detachment from an old signal. Neuroscience tells us that the brain constantly filters reality, deleting most of what it deems irrelevant. What you notice expands based on what your nervous system is prepared to integrate. When your internal state changes, your reticular activating system adjusts, and suddenly the world looks different. Not because it changed, but because you did. And when that internal shift aligns with intention, synchronicity emerges. Synchronicity isn't magic, it's feedback. It's the external confirmation that your internal frequency has crossed a threshold, that you're no longer broadcasting from the identity of someone bracing for lack, but from someone stabilizing into sufficiency, even before abundance arrives. This is why the signs feel personal. They don't shout. They recognize you. Carl Jung described synchronicity as meaningful coincidence without causal connection. Quantum theorists would say it's non-local correlation. Ancient mystics would simply say the field is responding. Different lenses, same truth. When the financial timeline shifts, the universe doesn't send you a check first. It sends you alignment. It sends you calm where panic used to live, curiosity where resignation once settled, a sense of timing replacing urgency. You begin to sense that forcing would actually interfere now. This is uncomfortable at first, because you were conditioned to believe that relaxation around money is irresponsible, that vigilance equals survival, that ease must be earned through exhaustion. But those beliefs belong to a scarcity-conditioned nervous system, and yours is recalibrating. Here's something rarely spoken aloud. Money responds to the nervous system faster than it responds to thought. You can affirm abundance all day, but if your body is still contracted around survival, the field reads contradiction. And contradiction collapses potential into delay. What's happening to you now is coherence. Your thoughts are slowing down. Your reactions are softening. Your sense of identity is loosening from struggle-based validation. And as that happens, the field starts offering you different data. Not guarantees, not outcomes, invitations. You may feel drawn to learning something new, not urgently, but naturally. You may feel compelled to desimplify instead of accumulate. You may feel an unexplainable trust in timing, even when logic can't justify it yet. This is not passivity. It's precision alignment. In quantum mechanics, coherence allows systems to exchange energy efficiently. Incoherent systems lose energy to noise. The same is true financially. When your inner system becomes coherent, fewer actions produce greater impact. Less effort yields more effect. This is why hustle culture collapses at higher levels of wealth. Not because effort disappears, but because effort becomes focused rather than frantic. And right now, your field is teaching you how to listen instead of chase. You may notice that certain people drift out of resonance. Conversations that once felt normal now feel draining. Advice that once motivated you now feels irrelevant. This isn't arrogance, it's frequency mismatch. Your system is reorganizing around a different financial identity. One that doesn't need to prove worth through suffering. One that doesn't equate rest with laziness. One that understands value as intrinsic, not conditional. And here's the part that may surprise you. The field often tests this new identity before rewarding it. Not with punishment, but with temptation. Temptation to panic, to revert, to overwork, to doubt the subtle calm you're beginning to trust. This is the threshold. If you react from the old identity, the field reads indecision and stabilizes the old pattern. But if you remain grounded, present, responsive rather than reactive, the new probability holds. This is where faith becomes neurological, not religious. Faith is the ability to remain regulated while reality reorganizes. And if you're honest, you've already felt moments where money stress simply didn't hook you anymore. Where you expected solutions instead of problems. Where you assumed support instead of abandonment. Those moments matter more than you realize. They are micro-collapses of probability, small selections of a different timeline. Stack enough of them, and the old reality loses coherence. It can't sustain itself without your emotional investment. This is why the shift feels quiet. Why it doesn't announce itself with fireworks. Why it feels almost anticlimactic at times. Because power doesn't need spectacle. And somewhere deep inside, you already know this. That's why you're still here. That's why these words don't feel foreign. That's why something in your chest feels steady instead of urgent. If this resonates, share it in the comments. It helps this message reach more seekers, not because you need validation, but because resonance amplifies coherence, and coherence is how fields change. At a certain point, the question stops being when. It becomes who. Because money does not move toward desire. It moves toward identity. This is the distinction almost everyone misses. You can want abundance intensely and still repel it. You can visualize wealth vividly and never touch it. You can follow every strategy, every rule, every system, and still feel like you're pressing against an invisible ceiling. That ceiling was never external. It was coherence. Money does not respond to effort alone. It responds to self-concept stabilized in expectation. In other words, the version of you that feels normal inside your nervous system becomes the version reality supports. And lately, something radical has been happening inside you. You've begun to loosen your grip on who you thought you had to be to deserve more. Not dramatically, not rebelliously, but quietly. You stopped justifying your dreams. You stopped explaining your worth. You stopped negotiating with life. This is subtle, but it's everything. Because the old identity, the one shaped by survival, believed money came with conditions. That it required sacrifice, exhaustion, self-betrayal. That ease was suspicious. That flow had to be temporary. That identity kept you safe. But it could never make you wealthy. Wealth, real wealth, requires a nervous system that can tolerate expansion without panic, without guilt, without the reflex to self-sabotage when things start working. This is why sudden money often destroys people. Their external reality outpaces their internal coherence. The system overloads, the field destabilizes, and the old identity reasserts itself through loss, chaos, or unconscious reversal. But your shift is different. Yours is gradual, integrated, somatic. Your capacity is growing before the visible influx. This is why nothing flashy has happened yet, and why that's a good sign. You're becoming someone for whom abundance feels normal, not exciting, not shocking, normal. This is the most dangerous knowledge of all. Reality doesn't reward intensity. It rewards consistency of state. What feels normal to you becomes inevitable. What feels extraordinary struggles to stay. And your internal baseline is changing. You no longer fantasize about escape. You envision stability with expansion. You don't crave winning. You expect continuity. That's the signature of a new financial identity. Neuroscience would describe this as predictive processing. The brain constantly forecasts reality based on prior expectation, then updates perception to minimize surprise. When your expectation shifts, perception follows, and action reorganizes without force. Ancient teachings would call this embodiment. Quantum theory would call it observer alignment. But lived experience calls it peace. You begin to make decisions that surprise even you. Not impulsively, cleanly. You walk away from things that once felt necessary. You say yes to things that once felt risky, without adrenaline, without fear. This is not courage, it's coherence. Money recognizes coherence instantly, because money is not moral. It is not sentimental. It is not impressed by struggle. Money is a flow system. It moves where it can circulate without resistance, and resistance is not doubt, it's identity conflict. The old identity tried to control money, to dominate it, to chase it, to secure it against loss. That created friction, tightness, collapse. The new identity relates to money the way the ocean relates to waves. Movement without attachment, direction without tension, power without strain. This is why your relationship to time is also changing. You're less obsessed with deadlines, less anxious about pace, less frantic about outcomes. Not because you don't care, but because you felt something stabilize underneath the uncertainty, a quiet knowing. That knowing is not belief. Belief requires maintenance. Knowing does not. Knowing emerges when enough internal evidence accumulates. And your system has been collecting evidence for a while now. Moments when things worked out unexpectedly. Times when you were supported without asking. Instances where the wrong choice led to the right outcome. You may not have logged them consciously, but your nervous system did. And now it trusts life a little more than it used to. That trust is magnetic. Because here is the truth most never hear. Wealth is not attracted by confidence. It is attracted by regulation, by the absence of desperation, by the presence of grounded expectancy. This is why some people speak quietly and move massive resources, why others shout affirmations and stay stuck, why silence often precedes breakthrough. Your silence is not emptiness, it's readiness. You're no longer asking the field to prove itself to you. You are allowing it to respond. This is the phase where action becomes intuitive rather than strategic, where opportunities feel obvious in hindsight, where effort aligns with timing instead of fighting it. And from the outside it may look like luck, but from inside the field, it's precision. You didn't become worthy. You became available. Available to receive without flinching. Available to hold without gripping. Available to expand without apology. This is the identity wealth recognizes. Not the one who wants, the one who can. There is a quiet moment that comes after every irreversible shift. Not celebration, not confirmation, but recognition. It's the moment you realize you're no longer looking back. The old financial timeline, the one built on effort without return, on anxiety disguised as responsibility, on hope deferred again and again, doesn't collapse in flames. It simply loses relevance. Like a language you once spoke fluently, but no longer think in. You don't fight it. You don't argue with it. You outgrow it. This is the final stage of a quantum shift. Non-attachment to the past version of yourself. Not rejection. Gratitude. Because that version carried you here. But it cannot go further. And you can feel that now. When you imagine your future, the images are calmer, more stable, less dramatic. You don't see rescue. You see rhythm. You don't see winning. You see continuity. You don't see escape. You see residence inside a life that actually fits you. This is how you know the field has settled. Quantum systems, once collapsed, don't flicker endlessly between states. They stabilize, they commit, they move forward with coherence. And so do you. The proof you were promised was never external. It was internal irreversibility. You can't unknow what you now sense. You can't return to pretending money is outside you. You can't convincingly panic the way you used to. Even if challenges appear, and they will, you'll meet them differently. Without drama, without identity threat, without the old story activating. That's the real wealth. Because circumstances always change. Fields fluctuate. Markets move. But identity, once reorganized, becomes the constant that reality must answer to. From here, action becomes clean. You won't force opportunities. You'll recognize them. You won't chase income. You'll position for flow. You won't prove your worth. You'll express it. And money, being what it is, a responsive system, will do what it always does in the presence of coherence. It will move. But not because you demanded it, not because you earned it, but because there's no longer resistance in the channel. This is the dangerous knowledge they never teach. Once you stop needing money to validate your safety, it becomes free to support your life. Once you stop gripping, it circulates. Once you stop negotiating with fear, the field reorganizes. You were never meant to fight reality. You were meant to signal to it. And now your signal is clear. You don't need to announce this shift. You don't need to convince anyone. You don't even need to believe harder. The timeline has already closed behind you. From this point on, life will respond differently. Not because you change the world, but because you change the observer through which the world is selected. That's the secret. And if this truth lingers in you, if it feels both unsettling and deeply familiar, understand this. You were always meant to find it exactly when you did. Not before, not after, now.